I've never heard it put that way. I love that. I've never heard it put that way, that when you're taking the edge off the anxiety, that's actually taking the edge off the joy.
It is.
Like, that's phenomenal. That's such a great way of looking at it, because you're so right. There's no, you can't be selective about what it takes off.
No. And it's a trick. I mean, truly, like society, the like way that your family of origin maybe used the thing that you now use, you've convinced yourself that, oh, no, this is just the nice way to segue out of a long day into a soft, landing an evening. But you can't actually appreciate the breaking down of the muscle if you're muting the fruit that would have otherwise come from it. You have to sit in it. Brendan says you have to honor the struggle. And I've really, truly come to appreciate that that's a part of my journey as much as anything.
Yeah, who's listening to these lies, listening or watching right now going, wow, I've told myself some of these lies. I know I have. Like, these are just, whatever your thing is, you may not have been drinks for you. It could have been something totally different. But the point is, you have told yourself at some point that something bad for you is good at taking the edge off. For me, I mean, my worst enemy a long time was sugar.
Right?
It was just tons of sugar. I grew up eating 4 chocolate products a day. Like, literally a chocolate biscuit, a chocolate bar, a chocolate yogurt, and a chocolate ice cream. And so I was addicted to chocolate. And people don't even realize how bad sugar can be. So sometimes you're thinking, oh, it's just sugar. But it's like, no, sugar can be terrible. And the other thing I had growing up was experimenting with drugs.
Yeah.
And I was experimenting with a ton of drugs. And I just did not realize it until I saw someone go through a really bad experience with drugs. It didn't hit me in the face as to how bad it was.
Yeah.
And I always think that if we're not exposed to stories and people who have shed that pain, and sometimes you see someone who's still going through it, you just can't stop it. So I'm really happy you're talking about it.
Thank you. Now,
because I think
it was hard to write, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
And it's hard to write, and one of the proudest chapters.
Why was it hard to write, really? Like, why was it genuinely hard for you?
It was hard because admitting that something got away from me is something that I'm, I don't have shame for it still, but I had shame for it at the time.
Yeah.
It was hard to have to look myself in the mirror, sit across from my wife and have a hard conversation about having let something that I'd convinced myself I was completely and totally in control of become something that was subconsciously or unconsciously a crutch to get through hard things. And I, like any human, you don't want to have to admit that you're having to do something that isn't great for you to get through a hard thing. I'd like to have thought I was stronger for it. I feel way stronger now for having come through a season where it was, really working against me. And if you're right now struggling with something and you're worried that maybe it'll take too much time or you don't know if you can do it, I am telling you, you can go from a low to a high in a very short amount of time, just by considering what you could replace that bad habit with in terms of coping mechanism. Go from positive to negative, or negative to positive. Oh.
And I know you love the book, The Power of Habit.
I love.
Yeah. I've seen you recommend it before, and it's so true. But tell me now, what happens now when, like you're saying, you're probably invited to more events, you're probably invited to more parties, you're probably invited to more networking events, and all those triggers. What are you doing when it's like when now you're coming home late? You're probably working harder than you've ever worked before. You're pushing yourself more. You're giving yourself more. What's happening when you're getting home later, whatever it may be, when it's like all those triggers, like what are you doing at that moment right now?
Well, I mean, I've gone through this interesting process of, it's a math equation in my mind.
Yeah, go for it.
If I want to have the energy to survive a day where triggers are guaranteed to come, then I better have my morning routine happening so consistently that regardless of what life throws at me, I've established a foundation. If I want to have the energy to pour into an audience that's showing up for me on the 18th stop of a 20-city book tour, then I better have an exercise routine that has me so conditioned that I can show up well. If I want an exceptional relationship with my wife, then I better be actively pursuing her every single day. And I write these things down every morning, right? I write them down every morning in active word phrases so that it's a trigger for me to preempt the triggers that are going to potentially throw off my intention, right? And the if-then, it's one of those things where if you're listening, you're like, man, I don't want to have to get up that early. Okay, then you just have to change the then statement, right? Like, I want to honor if you find yourself in a season where you really want to commit to Netflix for 2 hours each night. If you do, that's fine, but make your expectations realistic of what you're able then to do. I have to go to bed at 9 o'clock each night. if I have a night where I'm working late, it's altering my ability to get up and start my day the way that I have to have the kind of day that I intend to have. Like intention and routine is crazy important now that I'm really wanting to focus on what it takes to do the thing I want to do here every day.
Yeah, those are I love that. If-then statements. Those are awesome.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. Okay, let's do a couple more. Let's do a couple more before we move forward. Which other one did I want to pick up? This one I really like because I'm intrigued by it. Being right all the time doesn't make me an ass.
Ugh.
Tell me.
I mean, if there were a debate club, I'd still be auditioning to be captain. Like, it's like your greatest strengths are your greatest weaknesses. And arguing, negotiation, having worked in sales for a good part of my life, whether it's ego or whatever it is, right? Like winning arguments to me was affirming things for my ego at the expense of my personal brand, at the expense of my relationships, right? Like you talk in your book about the difference between ego and self-esteem. And that line is not one that I had a great handle on for many of whether it was business transactions. I'm going to come in with bravado and I'm going to be right at the expense of potentially maintaining a healthy long-term relationship, or with your partner, with your kids. like there's sometimes you got to lose the battle to win the war kind of mentality that was just lost on a younger, more ego-focused version of myself. Being right all the time makes you an ass. There are times when absolutely you ought to yield for the benefit of changing a little bit of the reputation that you have.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I think, a lot of people have this fight for justice too. It's like when you think you know what's right and you're willing to go to town for it. And in a relationship, I mean, I'm married too. I don't have kids yet, but I definitely, in a marriage, it definitely doesn't work. And it also doesn't work because you're not really right half the time. Like, I mean, I've had to really open up to that. I think getting married, moving country, spending time with people from so many different backgrounds. We both travel a lot.
Yeah.
When I go to different parts of the world, their values are totally different.
Yeah.
And you realize your version of right is just what you had when you grew up. Like
100%. I mean, here's the thing. There are hills to die on, right? There are things that I do believe you should fight to the death.
Totally.
It doesn't matter. And I have those things. But those are the exceptions to the rule. And so often there are those of us that think that all things have equal weight. We fight on that hill regardless of what the topic is. And to me, the sign of maturity is having some objectivity for the sliding scale of which things really matter and which things you can bite your tongue and wait until some other time to see if there's another way to shape someone's opinion.
Yeah, for me, lose the battle, win the war, or lose the battles, win the war has been like, I have lost so many battles in my life, whether it's been business, relationships, work, career. Like, I have lost so many battles and I will gladly lose them. And you get to a point where you start smiling when you're losing battles because you know it's helping you win the war. You can see that you're saving all that energy, all your reserves, all your grit, all your resilience.
Oh, yeah.
You're holding on to so much more, whereas each one of those wars could just destroy you.
My wife and I worked together for the first time in our life in this last 2 years. And it has been the best 2 years of our marriage. It's been the hardest 2 years of our marriage. And the nuance of learning this and applying it to our business relationship so that our personal relationship would still afford makeout has been one of the things that, I've written this somewhat in real time as the events of these last 2 years have been unfolding. And this conversation is as much about Dave and Rachel working together and still wanting to have this exceptional relationship outside of work as anything else. It's hard work. If you work with your partner, but the decision to, fight for the things that actually matter and then yield to the things that will afford you to still like each other as much as you love each other, that's important too.
And have you found that working together, because I've never worked with my wife professionally and it's not part of our plan in the work we do, at least for now, you never know. I mean, things. But have you found that the strength of your relationship for you affects the strength of your business relationship? Or actually, have you been able to keep it very separate where both of you can perform for the business, even if things weren't working out at home and then you're figuring them out? And then how hard is either of them?
It's interesting because we've changed the nature of our relationship because of the responsibility of our business.
Yes.
And so we would both, I think, self-identify as recovering codependents, where our interest in keeping the other person happy, even if sometimes it tipped into unhealthy, like we're not going to talk about this thing that we probably ought to talk about, that was a version of our past that in working together, we quickly had to change. And that meant like really embracing radical candor. Kim Scott's got a great book called Radical Candor. This idea of like responsibly and respectfully bringing up things that are hard in the moment for the benefit of not letting them fester and spoil. Our team, it's grown pretty quick, got a 65-person team. Mommy and daddy can't be fighting or they will lose focus. They will worry about the direction of the team. We don't want to fight. So instead of fighting, we have really hard conversations all the time so that nothing is ever unsaid. Well, that's just a fundamental change from who we were, but it's produced an unbelievably healthier version of who we are, because now there's nothing laying under the surface. It's all out there, and it's brought out for the best of our relationship and the best of our work product.